So, Microeconomics, Chapter 7, Supply and its Elasticity. So, today we are going to discuss supply and quantity supply. So, we shall see what is the main difference that we can point out between supply and the quantity supplied. So, as it is given here, supply is nothing but the whole schedule or the curve that is depicting the relationship between price and quantity supplied in a period. So what is a supply? Supply is made, or supply is just indicating the relationship that occurs between the price of a commodity and at that price how much quantity is supplied in a particular period of time. So that is the supply. It is nothing but the relationship between price and quantity supply in a particular period of time, because supply is made according to the prices. And what about quantity supplied? Quantity supplied refers to the quantity which the producers would make available in the market at a particular price of the commodity. So when it comes to quantity supplied, it is that quantity which the producers will bring to the market, will make it available in the market at particular price of the commodity. They are very similar, but then little difference is there between the supply and the quantity supplied. In supply, we are talking about the relationship. Here, when it comes to quantity supplied, it is the quantity which the producers will bring to the market, make it available for sale in the market at a particular price of a commodity. So, we have just discussed supply and quantity supplied. And the next topic that we will see after knowing this supply and quantity supply is the movement along a supply curve. Movement along the supply curve. But before that, when we talk about supply, as seen above, supply, the quantity supplied, the amount of commodity that will be supplied varies with changes in prices of the commodity. So prices will determine how much quantity of a commodity will be supplied in the market. So it varies from price to price, what amount of quantity to be produced. So change in quantity supply of a commodity occurs in response to the change in its price. So quantity of supply will respond, or quantity supply of commodity occurs with response to the price or with the change in its price. And at higher prices, more quantity is supplied and vice versa. And when the price is low, less quantity is supplied. So after knowing that, we shall see movement along a supply curve. So as we have seen above, according to the law of supply, or law of supply states that as the price of a commodity rises, the quantity supply of it by the producers increases, and we move up along the supply curve. So when the price increases, so this is the diagram to represent movement along the supply curve. So figure 2, movement along a supply curve. So let us see a situation where the price of a commodity has increased from P0 to P0 to P2. So price has increased. What will affect the supply when price rises? We have seen that supply also increases from Q0 to Q. Now before taking this point, let us say this point A is the equilibrium point, or it is the point where a producers will supply at this price P1. So that is the original point. So after the original price, after the original point of equilibrium, let us say price has increased from P1 to P2. So when price has risen or increased from P1 to P2, what we see is quantity supply also increased from Q1 to Q2. So we are moving upward towards the right of the supply curve. So we have moved from A to B when price has risen. So we are moving towards the right upward of the supply curve. That is when price increases. And another situation is price has fallen from P1 to PO. And what will happen to the quantity supply? Quantity supply will reduce from Q1 to QO at point C. So we are moving leftward from A to C, moving downwards towards the left. So when price falls, we are moving towards the left of the supply curve and moving downwards towards the supply curve. Leftward and then downward towards the supply curve, in the supply curve from A to C. That is happening when price falls from P1 to PO. So because of the changes in prices, that is rise in the price and then reduce in the price, we have a movement along the supply curve, that is moving upward and then moving downwards on the supply curve. That is called movement along the supply curve. And we will have upward movement towards the right on the supply curve when price rises, and then we will have a downward left movement on the supply curve when price falls. So that is all about movement along the supply curve, that is extension and contraction in supply curve. So extension is when the rise in the price of a commodity brings about increase in the quantity supply of the commodity. So moving upward towards the right is the extension, and that happens when price rise, when price of the commodity, when rise in the price of the commodity brings about increase in the quantity supplied of the commodity. And what about contraction? Contraction happens when price of commodity falls, which will lead to quantity supply to decrease. So price has fallen for that commodity, and then quantity supply also become less. So it decreases quantity supply because of the fall in the price. So that is contraction, moving left downward on the supply curve. That is contraction. So movement along the supply curve is seen in two ways. That is extension, and then this is extension, and then this is contraction. So that is the two ways of movement on the supply curve. But we should not be mistaken between extension and increase in supply. And then we should not also be mistaken between contraction and decrease in supply. So extension and increase in supply is different, and then contraction and decrease in supply is different, though it may sound similar and it may appear similar, because we shall see the reason with the diagrammatical representation also. But let us see what is given here. So in order to make it clear or not to get confused, we should be able to distinguish them very clearly. That is the distinction between extension and then increase in supply, and also secondly contraction and decrease in supply. So let us see one by one. So extension in supply occurs, as we have said, as a result of rise in the price of the commodity. So extension happens because there is a rise in the price of the commodity. But increase in supply, what does it mean? So increase in supply means that due to the reduction of prices, due to the reduction of price, reduction of prices of resources, and then advancement in the technology, etc., the whole supply curve shifts to the right shifts towards the right, showing more is supplied than before at its price. So extension is happening or occurs because of the rise in the price of a commodity, and it is just a movement. But when it comes to increase in supply, it occurs due to the reduction of the price of resources and then advancement of the technology, therefore reducing the cost of production. So what happens is the whole supply curve shifts towards the right. So it is no longer a movement of the supply curve, but shifting of the supply curve towards the right, showing more is supplied than before at its price. So there is a difference between movement along the supply curve and the extension, or extension. When we talk about extension and contraction, it is all about movement on the supply curve. But when we say increase and decrease of supply, we are talking about shift of the supply curve. So increase in supply curve means shift of the supply curve towards the right due to the reduction of price of resources, technological advancement, etc. And contraction happens, what we have seen is that due to the fall in the price, the supply of that commodity also falls. But decrease in supply would mean, because of the rise in the price of resources and then charging of excise duty, etc., the entire supply curve shifts towards the left. So this supply curve will shift towards the left, showing that less quantity is supplied at every price. So even in contraction, we are just talking about movement along the supply curve. But when we talk about decrease in supply, we are talking about shift of the supply curve towards the left, indicating that less is supplied, less quantity is supplied at every prices. That is the difference that we have to distinguish between extension and increase in supply, and also contraction and decrease in supply. So here in this diagram, it is the movement along the supply curve, and we shall discuss this increase in supply and decrease in supply, that is shifting of the supply curve in detail with the diagrammatical representation. But here we are in this movement along supply curve, we are measuring quantity supply on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we are measuring price, and then SS is the supply curve. So when you write your exam, you have to write the given. So what you are measuring on the x-axis, what you are measuring on the y-axis, and origin, O is the origin, and what is the supply curve, SS is the supply curve, and all those things before you start explaining your diagram. So the next topic that is in our hand is shift in the supply curve. So we have discussed a little bit about the increase and the decrease in the supply curve, which is completely different, which is different from extension and contraction of the supply curve. So extension and contraction of the supply curve is movement within the, or movement on the supply curve. But when we talk about increase and decrease in supply, we are talking about the shift of the supply curve, whether it is rightward shift or leftward shift. So there is a change in the supply curve when we talk about increase and decrease in the supply curve. So why does that shift in supply curve occurs? So we shall see. So in the law of supply, we have stated that the supply of a commodity in economics means it is the entire schedule, or the entire supply curve depicting the relationship between the price and also the quantity supplied of the commodity, other factors remaining constant. So mark that line, other factors remaining constant. Other factors that is determining supply is assumed to be kept constant when we talk about law of supply. So these other factors, what are the other factors that we have assumed that they are constant, is that these other factors are the state of technology, prices of the inputs, resources, and then price of other related commodities, etc. So in the law of supply, we have assumed all these things as constant. But in the long run, it cannot be constant. So it is the changes in these factors that cause a shift in the supply curve or the supply schedule. So when changes occurs in the, or when technology advances, when the price of input falls or increases, and when the price of other related commodities changes, it will affect the supply curve, so that the supply curve either shift towards the right or shift towards the left, and there won't be any movement, or there won't be any contraction or extension taking place when these are the things that we have assumed to be constant changes. So when these factors changes, then changes in these factors cause the shift in the supply curve or the supply schedule. So we have two, shift when it comes to the shifting of the supply curve, that is rightward shift and then leftward shift of the supply curve. Why rightward shift? Because there is an increase in the supply. Why leftward shift? Because there is a decrease in the supply, decrease in the amount of quantity that is supplied. So what we can say is that change in supply or shift in supply refers to the changes in the supply curve due to the changes in factors other than the prices. So there is a shift or there is a change in the supply curve due to the change in the factors other than the price. So we are not considering price here. We are considering other factors that can determine supply, such as state of technology, price of inputs, and then price of other related goods. So this increase in supply of a commodity, due to the reduction in prices of inputs, would cause the entire supply curve to shift towards the right, as shown in figure 3. So rightward shift. So figure 3, we are again measuring quantity on the x-axis and then price on the y-axis, and SS is the original supply curve. So what will happen when there is a reduction in prices, when the state of technology is advanced, and then when the price of the other related commodities falls? Then there will be a shift in the supply curve from SS to S1 or S-S- supply curve. So at the same price, that is at OP1 price, more quantity is supplied here. Earlier it was supplying only Q1. Now at the same price OP1, it can supply OQ2 amount of commodity. So price is the same. So at the same prices, earlier it was only supplying OQ1 amount of commodity. But because of the reduction in the price of resources, inputs, advancement in technology, and fall in the price of other related commodity, it is able to supply more quantity of commodity at the same price. So even here at price 2, at the same price, earlier it was supplying only OQ2, but now it is able to supply OQ3 at the same price level. And even at price 3, earlier it was supplying only OQ3, now it has moved to this quantity of commodity. So we have seen the shift towards the right of the supply curve because of the changes in the other factors rather than price. So other factors such as state of technology changes, price of inputs has fallen, and then price of other related commodities has also fallen. So because of that, we are experiencing or witnessing the shift of the supply curve towards the right. which indicates that more quantity can be supplied at the same prices. So that is increase in the supply, causing a rightward shift in the supply curve. So on the other hand, the decrease in supply means the quantity supplied at each price, the quantity supplied at each price of the commodity, it is shown in figure 2. So the decrease in supply at each price is shown in this figure 4. So in this figure number 4, as a result of decrease in the supply, so the original supply curve is SS, and then the supply curve has shifted from SS to S dash dash S dash dash. So it has shifted towards the left. So as a result of decrease in supply, the supply curve shifts to the left from SS to S dash dash S dash dash. So as shown by the arrow mark, as shown by this arrow mark at its price such as P1, P2, P3, the quantity supplied at S dash dash S dash dash has declined. So see, same price P1, let us say earlier it was supplying Q1. Now it has reduced to this much amount of quantity being supplied. And again at price P2, OP2, earlier it was supplying OQ2, and now it has decreased in quantity supply. Again at OP3 price, earlier it was supplying OQ3, but now it has decreased to this much amount of quantity supply. So at S dash dash S dash dash, quantity supply is reduced or decreased, price remaining the same. Why did that occurs? Why there is a decline in the supply occurs? So the decrease in the supply occurs when the prices of factors or inputs used for the production of a commodity go up. So when the factor price or when the prices for factor goes up, then the supply so when the prices of a factor or inputs, let us say, that is used for production of a commodity go up, so that its quantity of the commodity produced at a higher cost per unit, which cause a reduction in quantity supply at its prices. So when there is an increase in the prices of a factor or input, the result is that the quantity supply at its price will reduce. That is the first reason that supply curve shifting towards the left. Second reason is that the imposition of an excise duty or sales tax on a commodity, that is also contributing to the decline in the supply of a commodity. So the imposition of an excise duty or sales tax on a commodity means that its quantity will now be supplied at a higher prices than before. So the tax or the excise duty will be counted as part of the cost of production. So they are going to charge the commodity at a higher prices than before, so as to cover the excise duty or sales tax per unit. So this implies that quantity supply of the commodity at its price will also decreases, as shown by the shift of the supply curve. So when there is an increase in the cost of production, because the excise duty or the sales tax is included in the cost of production, then when the price is increased for the commodity, then they will supply less at its price. And again, another important cost factor causing a leftward shift in the supply curve is the rise of prices of other commodities using the same factors. For example, if price of wheat rises very sharply, then it will become more profitable for the farmers to grow it. So this will induce the farmers to reduce the cultivated area under other crops, say pulses, and they will devote it to the production of wheat only. So this will lead to the decrease in supply of pulses, whose supply curve will shift to the left. So when there is an increase in the price of a wheat, then the farmers or the producers will produce more of wheat, and then the supply of other commodities such as pulses, they will reduce in supply because there is a rise in the price of other commodities. So that is the increase in the supply causing a rightward shift in the supply curve, and then decrease in the supply causing a leftward shift in the supply curve. So that is all about shift in the supply curve, that is increase and decrease in supply.